One guy from England. 4 of them came out of second floor windows on the front and survived. 4 of us came out the south side of the building through a hole that the FBI had rammed in the side of the building with the tank. Only one person went out the back and survived, and that is Graham Craddock from Australia. He went out the chapel window and crawled through the smoke towards the swimming pool and ended up in the cinder block building, which was at the bottom of this big water tower, the same water tower that Peter Jett had been shot on the first day. Apparently all the snipers did not see him do that because of the smoke. So he sat in this cinder block building until the whole thing was burned down, all of the smoke was gone, and the FBI and so forth was starting to go through the rubble in the process of checking the rubble to see what was left. And he comes out of the cinder block building, and it scared the daylights out of him. They thought he snuck out somehow through a tunnel, but he'd been sitting in this little cinder block building all along. But we're the only 9 people that made it. And so what Mike McNulty is writing about here, and what he was documenting in his investigative documentaries that he had or was making, was the fact that there was some goings on at the back that the media couldn't see, couldn't film. And that is that people were trying to get out of the get out of the kitchen area, the cafeteria area at the back, which was right near the swimming pool. Some of them that came out there were fired at from the sniper nest and were driven back in. Others made an effort to leave. We believe Jimmy Riddle was one of them. He got about as far as the back end of the gymnasium. The FBI reports where there's a guy with a backpack on coming out the back. Uh-oh, he's fallen down. And he doesn't get up. We believe that Jimmy was shot and his body was bulldozed back into the rubble later to hide the fact that people were outside. This was one of the stories that the survivors and various investigators were passing around. Probably came up in the trial. So Janet Reno was upset about that. She wanted to put that to rest. And so Mike McNulty, in his investigations, and he's not just digging stories up, passing along rumors. Mike McNulty used the government's own flare footage, film from planes flying overhead, footage from observation.
Learning what the Davidians thought. I was famously called, in the press famously, in a gathering of reporters, was memorably called a groupie of the Davidians by Lee Hancock, the reporter for the Dallas News, who is the establishment's expert about Waco. I confess to having been a student of the Davidians. I still don't believe any of it. That puts to rest that charge. I never did believe any of it. I remain agnostic. Second thing I want to bring up is the gun control issue. Most of the support that came to the Davidians, let me first get into freedom of religion. The assault on the Davidians was charged as a violation of freedom of religion of the First Amendment. When I look at it, I see, and actually my wife told me this. I said, this is a violation of freedom of religion. And she said, who defines freedom of religion, church or state? I said, well, the state does. The government does. Now you know what kind of freedom of religion you have, she said. If you look at the law, and last week after a discussion with Clive, I looked at Ellen White to see what she believes. She saw it the same way. The Constitution allows you to believe anything you want. Now tell me, how can they enforce a law against belief? I may believe there's a Martian standing at the back door, and how do they know? It allows you to say that there's a Martian standing at the back door. It allows you to profess, but it does not allow you to practice. If, for example, David was trying to have 24 children by virgins, and some of these children were born to underage women, by our laws, he committed statutory rape. And that is not a violation to have arrested him for that, for which the federal government had no authority, by the way. But had he been arrested for that by the state authorities, that would not have been a violation of freedom of religion. Because we don't have freedom of religion. We have regulated religion. The example I give you points it out. The same thing goes for gun control. We Americans say, well, that's a right we have. If you look at it, it's not quite that simple. The British, before the American Revolution, freely owned guns. No one to this day has ever questioned the right of a farmer to own a shotgun to kill snakes or for a hunter to own a rifle. But like with religion, we have regulated it. The regulations started with a regulation against a machine gun. I don't know where they will end. I don't know, I'm agnostic about this. I don't know what to make of it. When the Founding Fathers wrote the Constitution, they gave us freedom to own firearms because that freedom had existed under the British, and the American Revolution wasn't about depriving people of British liberties. It was about increasing them. They did that because they did not believe in a standing army, or many of them did not. They feared a standing army. They associated it with the British standing army. It was a feature of tyranny for them. What they foresaw was a government, a people which defended themselves through militias. And the Constitution says in order to have a well-regulated militia, you can have guns. I want to mention here that the militia provision was put in at the suggestion of senators from the slave-holding states, because those militias were used to catch runaway slaves and suppress slave rebellions. So that the Second Amendment, in which a lot of people take great pride and point to for American freedom, has also been touched by the theme that runs through all our national life, which is white supremacy. We can't be entirely proud of the Second Amendment. In any case, when the founders wrote the Second Amendment, they were allowing Americans to own any weapon that an army or a government might have, because you needed those weapons to resist tyranny and foreign conquest. What are you going to do with missiles and drones and smart bombs? The founders' principle was, if the government can have it, the people can have it. because they need to be able to defend themselves against tyranny. I don't know anybody who thinks that their next door neighbor ought to have a missile silo. I think drones would make us uncomfortable if they have guns. So if we believe in the Second Amendment, we have to choose. Should we have the right to own any weapon the government does? And if it does, there are two ways to go. Everybody gets a missile silo and a drone, or the government gets rid of those weapons of mass destruction. Now, what are the chances of our government getting rid of its weapons of mass destruction? We now have a standing army that can impose tyranny. And we're talking about little regulations over civilian ownership of guns, which cannot resist the army we've got now. Firearms will no longer help us make a revolution or intimidate tyrants. They've got us outgunned. So I don't know what to do about that issue. I did not write my book to please the NRA.
Not that I was agreeing with what was being presented at the time, but I didn't like the way they treated, at the time it was Mark Rowe, I didn't like the way they treated him, so I approached him and said, hey Mark, I don't really like the way they treated you. I said, I'm not agreeing with what you said, but I think you have a right to speak and say what you want. And so I pretty much invited everybody there to continue the Bible study at my house. And this all took place in Hawaii. I had a big house in Hawaii, a big company, big car, just everything was going pretty good in my life as far as my Hawaii. It just created a big controversy within the Adventist church. It was pretty wild. But so after all that, I decided to, I was like, well, where are you guys at? Well, we're in Waco, Texas. I was like, I'd never heard Waco before. I never even knew this city existed. And it's like way out in the country, so I was like, well, I'm going. My friends and family thought I was crazy, fanatical, just a lot of things misunderstood. But I felt like, I went to church for a reason. I wanted to know truth, and now an opportunity came, and I would be foolish not to take advantage of this. So I actually will come to fruition. It's kind of like waiting. Waiting is hard to do for anything, but as you can see what impact this has had on the world and all these people that maybe it's not time for judgment yet. Maybe more people need to know about this or contemplate this. I don't know. I don't have all the answers. All I can answer is for myself, and I believe we're all going to stand before God someday and answer for what your choices you made, what you've done, what you didn't do. And so, my hope that this is all going to